Glen Thompson was a small town in rural Victoria, Australia. It lay over 2 hours east of Geelong and a travel distance of 167 kilometres. It was a town where everyone knew each other and nothing stayed secret for very long. It was also to this town that a European couple and their small baby girl moved. They were Maria and Drago Mikhailovich. They had fled their home and left behind their families in the province of Istria in the middle of the night in the years following the end of the Second World War. Both Maria and Drago had seen their homelands devastated by the ravages of war. They had seen country borders redrawn and the red wave of communism sweep towards them as it engulfed Eastern Europe. Closer to home, their province of Istria was no longer Italian. It was taken from Italy and had been given to Croatia. Their home had become the spoils of a war that had slaughtered their loved ones, their neighbours, and carved a much darker horror than anyone thought possible. Fearing their future under Stalin's coming communism, Maria and Drago Mikhailovich fled their home. A young couple deeply in love risked their lives to cross the border into Italy and try to secure a better future for themselves and the family they were already beginning. And with them was their newborn infant daughter, Lucia Zora Mikhailovich. Their journey took them all the way to Australia, a country on the other side of the world about which they knew only two things. One, that they spoke English, a language they themselves did not share, and that the country was Catholic. On this information alone, they sought to make a new life, far from the chaos, communism, and post-war horrors that was engulfing Europe at the time. By 1962, Maria and Drago were settled in the Australian town of Glen Thompson. Little Lucia was growing up quickly. Maria found work as a cook in the nearby town of Ararat, 37 minutes away by car. Drago, meanwhile, found work in a nearby brickworks factory. Slowly they were learning the local language, but found English one of the most challenging languages to learn. It was not like Italian or Croatian at all. Little Lucia wound up teaching her parents English at home, passing on the lessons she herself was learning at school. Maria and Drago did their best to adapt to life in their new country. It was hard though, as there was no one in Glen Thompson who spoke their language, and there was nowhere they could go to buy the foods they were used to in Europe. They did their best though, and made the most of things. Every day, Maria would catch the bus from Glen Thompson to Ararat for work. She had found employment as a cook at the Ararat Lunatic Asylum. She would work until late in the evening, when Drago would be home from work, and he would then pack little Lucia in the car and drive half an hour north to Ararat to pick up Maria. On Fridays, Drago would shout little Lucia some fish and chips. This always made Lucia happy. It was well after 8 p.m. when Maria's shift would be done, and by then the sun had long since set, plunging the whole land into a deep, starry darkness. On one day in particular, things had felt off at Maria's Ararat workplace. Several things happened that she did not at once understand. The main kitchen of the Ararat Lunatic Asylum was large and bright. The lights were clear white that shone off white walls and worn linoleum that were even now decades old. There were several cooking stations along one long wall with plenty of cold steel benches for food preparation. Maria walked into the kitchen, having just placed her effects in her locker. She wore her workplace embroidered apron and headed first for a whiteboard where the evening meal was written down. That evening's meal was roast beef with potatoes and some assorted vegetables. The potatoes and vegetables were sourced from the asylum's own farms that had managed on the extensive fenced-off property. The meat was trucked in daily and stored in walk-in freezers. When Maria arrived for her shift, the meat had already been laid out to thaw, waiting for the kitchen staff to arrive. The next task was the preparation of the vegetables, so she, with a handful of other ladies, headed out and began gathering the vegetables they'd need for the night. About an hour into her shift, Maria was in the kitchens again, washing vegetables and preparing them for boiling. The large room was now warming nicely from the ovens that were roasting the meats. There was a general hum of conversation between all the women, and overseeing it all was a heavy-set middle-aged woman. Her greying hair was tied up in a tight bun, and she oversaw the kitchen with a hawkish eye for detail and tyrannical control. This was the head of the kitchen staff, Joanne Hurley. Maria did her best to avoid the head of kitchen staff. She had made friends with a number of women who did their best to help Maria learn the language of English. Joanne Hurley, however, was a stern woman who looked down upon immigrants, and especially those who did not know English. If Joanne and people to her way of thinking had their way, these immigrants would never have been allowed into the country. Usually, Joanne was imperturbable. This evening was different. She seemed distracted, looking at the main entrance to the kitchen hall. Maria noticed this and glanced at several of her work companions. They followed her gaze and also took note of Joanne's distracted demeanour. None of them knew what could be the matter. Half an hour later, an alarm suddenly exploded over the speakers, and all the women in the kitchen froze. They looked up, and Maria was as bewildered as the rest of her work companions. Joanne's head snapped around, looking up at the speakers. She rushed to the main door, dragging open the great rolling door, and looked out into the corridor beyond. Maria leaned over her counter. She saw several guards running down the corridor outside, their voices loud, yelling in English so fast she could not understand what they were saying. She leaned back and felt her hands begin to shake. It was then that the voice of Joanne Hurley cut through their thoughts and fears and snapped them all back to reality. "All right, ladies. This dinner isn't going to cook itself. Back to work. If we need to evacuate, we'll be informed. Get to it." Maria stared at her, not understanding the head of kitchen staff's rapid-fire speech. She looked at the women beside her with a raised eyebrow. The women nodded to the work in front of Maria and discreetly waved a hand to continue. Maria got the message and went back to her tasks. She was on vegetables tonight, and she had a pile of carrots she was peeling for the pots of water that were sitting nearby, slowly being brought to the boil. It was not too long after that the speakers finally fell silent. An uneasy calm began to replace the tension that had built up in the kitchen. As Joanne Hurley stood rock-steady with her tree-trunk-like arms across her barrel chest, the door to the kitchen had been left open, and occasionally guards could be seen walking past. At one point, Maria looked up from her work to stretch out a kink in her back. It cracked loudly and drew some glances from the other women, but none of them were terribly surprised. Some jobs in the kitchen were more awful than others for one's back. In that moment, Maria happened to look at the main entrance, and two guards walked past. Between them was another figure, skinny with buzz-cut hair. He wore a white, long-sleeved top and trousers, and had his arms folded around him and bound with extra-long sleeves that locked into brass latches. Maria subconsciously knew this type of jacket. She had been shown this type of jacket upon starting work at the asylum, but this was the first time she had seen it on an inmate. But it was not his clothing that struck and frightened Maria. It was the gaunt face, the sunken eyes with dark shadows beneath them, and the vacant, ghostly look in their eyes. She gasped and shivered. She had seen that look before, in men who had gone through an incredible, terrifying, traumatic experience. The inmate's empty, hollow look mirrored the looks she remembered from soldiers who had physically survived the Second World War, but had mentally succumbed to shock and insanity. She had only been a child during the last World War, but she had seen things that would stick with her until the end of her days. Maria shivered as the inmate was quickly escorted beyond her view. She tried to get back to her work, but she knew that face would haunt her now. God, she thought, why is there so much horror in this world? It was hours later. Maria had finished her shift. The food had been cooked, served, and sent out to all the inmates across the wards. Then the kitchen staff had spent their time cleaning up and getting the kitchen back to a clean state for the morning shift. Now she sat in the front passenger seat with Drago behind the wheel, driving them carefully down the dark roads away from Ararat. Maria looked over her shoulder and smiled. Little Lucia was back there, eyes closed and sleeping peacefully, snoring gently. Maria turned back and leaned deep into her seat, letting her gaze get lost in the darkness beyond the car's windscreen. She didn't see it at first, but Drago did. He frowned and sat up behind his wheel. This drew Maria's attention at once, and she looked over at her husband. She spoke in a type of Croatian that was littered with Italian words. "What is it?" Drago did not immediately reply, but he leaned forward, peering into the darkness. Maria followed his gaze, and then she saw it too, a shape taking form in the darkness. It was off to one side, beside the road. Drago had slowed down, first out of caution, then to make sure he did not hit it. The shape became a man, clad in white, with a buzz-cut hairstyle. "Oh my God," he said. "Someone's out there." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Her mind went right back to that alarm and to the running guards earlier in her shift. She swallowed hard and slowly shook her head. Drago did not notice his wife's look of horror. He had been driving for a while now, and had on plenty of occasions pulled over to pick up hitchhikers. He saw the buzz-cut hairstyle and drew a sharp breath. "He must be a soldier. I can tell by that haircut. We can't leave him out in the dark like this." Maria's head snapped around, her eyes wide in horror and sudden anger. "How the hell can you tell that just by a haircut?" "Bah!" Drago waved off her concerns and slowed down more. By now the figure had noticed headlights and had turned, sticking his arm out and thumb up. Drago turned on his indicator to pull over. Maria felt her heart stop. "What are you doing?" "We have to help him," Drago said. "I'm going to pick him up and we can take him to where he wants to go." "Are you insane?" Maria snapped. Drago looked over at his wife and for the first time saw the horror on her face and in her eyes. He frowned and doubted his next actions. Maria was not prone to such a reaction. "You have no idea who that is, or what he is like. He could be violent, for God's sake, and we have our daughter in the back seat. We're not letting him near her. I don't like this at all. You keep driving and take us home." Drago gave one last look at the hitchhiker they were approaching, and then slowly nodded. He flicked the indicator to blink in the opposite direction, and then picked up speed, giving the stranger by the side of the road a wide berth, before continuing down the road at 60 kilometers an hour, back to Glen Thompson. Maria sighed and slumped back in the chair. She closed her eyes and swallowed hard, looking back at Lucia in the back seat. Their young daughter was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the incident that nearly took place. They drove on in silence. It was a few days later, when Maria was back at work, that the full tale of that strange night was finally revealed. There had been an attempted breakout at the asylum. All but one had been caught immediately. One had gotten away. He was found hours later hitchhiking along a road. Maria was mortified to learn it was the same road they took home. If she had not been in the car, or if she had fallen asleep and not stopped her husband, then Drago would have pulled over and picked up an escaped lunatic. In that moment, she thanked God for giving her the strength to speak up and not allow Drago to pull over. This story would stay with Maria for years to come. She would never forget that night. If you enjoyed this content, then please like, subscribe and share. It would help us immensely. Would you like to see these videos early, before everyone else, or enjoy exclusive content? Then join Legio Centurion Films on Patreon. The greater the support, the more often we can create video content for you. Check out our other YouTube channel for all our other content released by Legio Centurion Films. There you will enjoy everything from our latest short films to examples of showreel scenes. You can also enjoy this content on our website, www.l-cfilms.com.au.